All right. So the next section we're going to talk about is right-wing media. So just to be clear, just to throw it that you can find like there's a lot of biased media out there. It's very hard to find very non-biased media. We'll talk a little bit later about some sources and different places to start, but most media is biased. So we're not, we're not going to be looking at right-wing media as, critically speaking, as a bias, their biasness or anything like that. And you can find, propaganda and misinformation on, in moderate to left-wing, media as well. So we're putting that out there, but at the same time, I think we need to kind of put on hold this whataboutisms for a second and take some time to seriously look at what's happening with right-wing media, because there is no, it's just that it's not even close the amount of misinformation and propaganda and news stations politically aligned with a particular party. It's just you can't find this anywhere else but with right-wing media. It's an enormous political tool at this point, and it's producing, as we're going to talk about, it's producing an enormous amount of misinformation right now in this country. And I think we need to start looking at right-wing media as this, again, we need to look at, we need to be able to critically look at all media, responsibly, and understand all media has bias, and there are, misinformation, on both sides. And at the same time, we need to understand what's happening on right-wing media, because it's happening on a level that's not happening anywhere else in this country or in a political alignment. So we're going to spend some, in the next section, we're just going to dive into how this got started, and where it's at right now, and the effects it's having on this country. Really, I think this Amin does a really great job of talking about just how right-wing media started, and it really started in 1987 with Ronald Reagan administration, with this FCC, the Federal Commission. Something, I forget the last word, but it's going to be on the next slide. But it's the FCC basically who looks over, and manages and regulates, our major media outlets, from TV to radio. So FCC, it's 5-member team, and 3 of them are picked by the whoever has the presidency, has a time, and then the other party gets the other 2 seats. So basically, whoever's the president at the time gets, dominates the agenda of the FCC. So when Reagan, his FCC, he decided that the fairness doctrine, it was this doctrine that's been around since like the 40s, that basically said, that if anything, if you're going to, push controversial views, or if you're going to attack people, there needs to be some kind of balanced coverage. You need to have people talk about other sides of the views. If you're attacking people, they need to actually have a chance to come on the air and defend themselves. So it's basically a way to kind of prevent a lot of propaganda and misinformation, and try to, show accurate, attempt, to provide more accurate information. Not to say it was perfect. There's definitely a lot of misinformation, and propaganda that was happening before 1987, but it did regulate a lot of, it did, provide, fairness and balance with a lot of media that was happening before then. But Reagan's administration claimed that it was a violation of free speech, and we should be able to say whatever we want, no matter how misinformed it is, or one-sided, or things like that. So they got rid of the fairness doctrine, and immediately we see this explosion of right-wing media. First, immediately the year later, we see explosion of conservative talk show hosts, like Rush Limbaugh, and we see that just blow up to this, it continues to this day. It's just an enormous amount. Conservative talk shows dominate the talk shows on radio. There was like 90% of them. And that's really where we see a lot of this competition for just trying to be extreme as possible, and starts producing hosts like Sean Hannity and Lauren Ingraham, and then eventually Roger Ailes creates, he's this political operative for Nixon and Reagan, media specialist, talks, about all about how, we need to have a news station that's, for, the Republican Party that, so he eventually creates Fox News that, it's supposed to be fair and balanced, but it's basically just it's very intentional, a news station for the Republican Party that just, that blows up, a decade later. Then we start seeing even more, a lot of conspiracy theory sites and a lot of hate sites like Breitbart and InfoWars starts appearing, and to the point that we have a situation right now where there's just a tidal wave of misinformation, all based on trying to support the political right at this moment. So we're going to kind of dive into how all of this happened, step by step, and talk about, how it's particularly affecting this country as well. So the first part, we got to talk about like the rise of the conservative radio. So basically, before the 80s, most radio was AM, and then FM came along. I don't really know the differences or technical differences, but apparently FM is a lot more better sounding, and music just plays a lot better on FM radio. So most of the music stations went to FM and left this huge gap of like, what are we going to do with AM radio? And that's where they started looking at creating new content such as talk radio. So that got started, but it wasn't too crazy at that point until as I said, Reagan decided that the fairness doctrine was a violation of free speech. So he gets rid of this fairness doctrine. It's been around since the 40s that really regulated how one-sided and how extreme and how misinformed news could be in this country. So once he gets rid of it, we just see this explosion of conservative talk shows that just blow up, and particularly the first one, a year after this, fairness doctrine went away, they brought aboard, Rush Limbaugh gets this conservative talk show. And we're going to talk a lot about Rush Limbaugh throughout this presentation, but he's pretty extreme, pretty white supremacist, pretty whitewashed history, American exceptionalism, supports patriarchy, all these things. But as you can see, he also, he is very openly racist about a lot of things, but he also uses a lot of this coded, racism that just it's just, as we see throughout this whole presentation, that this coded racism of, I'm not racist, that's, the extreme racist, or people wear hoods, I just think, black people need to go get a job, this like coded kind of racism, states' rights, all this stuff, so this is all, about the political right is all about, finding that there's a huge audience for this, whether it's the Southern strategy and the political, which created the modern Republican Party, whether it's, the religious right that really mobilized around, against, desegregation, and this, created these new, umbrella terms that really codes a lot of the racism that they're pushing this day. Anti-feminist movements, all this stuff it's a huge audience for this. And if you really look at the history of our country, you can understand why our country's been founded on a lot of these principles. And we sell a real whitewash Eurocentric history, to the point that this, it makes more sense to a lot of people, this coded racism and this idea that, black people are either inferior or lazy, governments, any attempt to kind of, fix past harms or just, reverse discrimination, reverse racism, all these different concepts. So there's enormous audience right now. And that's what they find with this, Rush Limbaugh and these new conservative stations is now, because they didn't have to really, provide balanced coverage. They could attack whoever they want and not give them a chance to rebuttal. So they just, so they got, they started off right back, just some really, really extreme conservative radio shows, shows started emerging, Rush Limbaugh, Bob Grant, all these other people started, coming on board. And then, but the Republican Party immediately, the House Speaker at the time, Newt Gingrich, really realized this was a powerful way to get to, to start promoting the Republican Party. So he starts, joining a lot of these shows and really, starts attaching these conservative radios to the Republican Party, and using them as a conduit, to kind of, get out their messages. So we start seeing there is a huge audience for a lot of this stuff. Then we start seeing in 1996, this is where it really blew up. We passed the Telecommunications Act in 1996, which basically just allowed for a handful of companies to basically buy up and gobble up all the radio stations all over the country. Beforehand, they had it was regulated, they had some protections. Most of the radio stations were owned by local, organizations or local businesses. So there was, so you couldn't just dominate the airways and send out one, message. There was a lot of variety to it. But after that 1996 Act, they removed all the regulations, and which allowed, a handful of companies like Clear Channel to just essentially buy up, hundreds of local radio stations, and then they would do, have nationally syndicated radio stations. So, and one of their, people they had a contract with Rush Limbaugh, and all of a sudden, instead of Rush Limbaugh having one station, he's being broadcast, all over the country. Clear Channel buys up over 800 radio stations over the next decade, and starts blasting people like Sean Hannity, Glenn Beck, all these people, and we start seeing that that majority of these radio stations are end up being conservative, and it's really important. There's a really great quote. Sorry, the picture is kind of covering up a little bit, but there's a report that the Center for American Progress did, called "The Structural Imbalance of Political Talk Radio," and they talk about where they say this dominance, according to the recent Center for American Progress report, the structural imbalance of political talk radio is due to structural imbalances, not popular demand. The complete breakdown of public trustee concept of broadcast, elimination of public interest requirements, and the relaxation of ownership rules have tipped the scales against localism and allowed the few to indoctrinate the many. So even though there is an audience for this, all these conservative shows don't pop up because of the demand. They pop up because of the deregulations. They pop up because, conservatives don't have to be fair anymore on the radio shows, or they can tack whoever they want and say whatever they want. They pop up because now, there's no protections against a few companies owning all the radio stations, and Clear Channel just dominates. So what we see by, 2007, we see that 90% of political talk shows are conservative. Vastly outcompetes, progressive, talk shows. And we see this. This is from 2007. There's 2,570 hours of conservative radios for every 254 hours of progressive radio. So it's just dominating all over the country. And the biggest part is there's some places, like in Houston and Dallas, there's variety, so people can choose what they want. Well, actually, not Houston, Dallas, but like in Los Angeles and San Francisco, there are progressive options. But for for majority of like rural America, this is the only radio stations they have. So if they want to get news, they're getting their news from Rush Limbaugh. There's no real other talk radio option for this. So, and we start seeing that the majority of people listening to the 90% of conservative talk shows are white Christian men above 54 as their main demographic. So they really are starting to, in a way, indoctrinate these people with these new messages around the Republican Party and around the political right. So I'm going to play this video. It's a couple minutes long of Rush Limbaugh on some of the things he says. I used to have like this 15-minute video. It was just too much to handle. Rush Limbaugh is, he's just constantly saying some really horrific things. But Trump, Trump recognizes, we're going to talk about Trump in the later section, but he created his whole campaign based on these really viral and hostile messages that were coming from the conservative, talk radios, like the idea of border walls and zero tolerance and punishing and separating kids. And all these things came from these radio shows, and he found the messages that had the biggest audience, and then he kind of created his whole platform. So he he really owes his presidency to a lot of, conservative radios, including, also Fox News and other right-wing, stations. So it's not a surprise that he gave someone that repeatedly says, super racist and super sexist and super homophobic things, the Medal of Freedom. But he awarded the Medal of Freedom to Rush Limbaugh, I believe it was last year.
They know that in their hearts, the Obamas don't like them. They understand it's a little bit of uppity-ism. Mitt Romney, he never had to eat no dog meat, as Barack has. Barack knows poverty. Let's take a look and see who is the cute kid in the White House. No, that's not the kid. That's the kid. We try to... What does it say about the college co-ed Susan Fluke, who goes before a congressional committee and essentially says that she must be paid to have sex? What does that make her? It makes her a slut, right? Makes her a prostitute. She wants to be paid to have sex. This is Paul Shanklin as Al Sharpton about Barack Obama. Barack, the magic Negro, lives in D.C. The LA Times, they call him that cause he's not authentic like me. Yeah, the guy from the LA paper said he make guilty whites feel good. They'll vote for him and not for me cause he's not from the hood. I do believe that the left wants to cause great damage to the NFL. What does the NFL stand for? Masculinity, strength, toughness. I'm sorry to say this. I don't think he's been that good from the get-go. I think what we've had here is a little social concern in the NFL. I think the media has been very desirous that a black quarterback do well. We're interested in black coaches and black quarterbacks doing well. I think there was a little hope invested in McNabb, and he got a lot of credit for the performance of this team that he really didn't deserve. The defense carried this team. Obama's America, white kids getting beat up on school buses now. I mean, you put your kids on a school bus, you expect safety, but in Obama's America, the white kids now get beat up with the black kids cheering, yeah, right on, right on, right on, right on. So, with an A on the end. Well, I think I can now. Isn't that the point? Because it's not racist. Rush Limbaugh, thank you for your decades of tireless devotion to our country. And Rush, in recognition of all that you have done for our nation, the millions of people a day that you speak to and that you inspire, and all of the incredible work that you have done for charity, I am proud to announce tonight that you will be receiving our country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
All right. So since the year he started in 1987, Rush Limbaugh has been the #1 commercial talk show since, for decades now. Again, this idea that he sells, what we've been talking about, this idea of like white victimhood, of, liberal government, kind of creating all these horrific programs around, like welfare and that creates dependency and affirmative action and anything that tries to fix things, or reverse racism, and all these concepts that we've been talking about. Confusing. Again, there's just such a huge audience for this stuff right now, and Rush Limbaugh has just really been capitalizing on it. Not only that, but also promoting and expanding it as well. The next section I want to talk about is like the Fox News. So Fox News, comes shortly after Rush Limbaugh and after the FCC, gets rid of the fairness doctrine, and essentially it's a brainchild of Roger Ailes. So Roger Ailes is basically he's a media consultant for Nixon, Reagan, Bush, Giuliani, all these big time Republican presidents and mayors, and he drafts this memo. Basically, it's called a plan for putting the GOP on TV news. And he creates this memo that basically says that what the Republican Party really needs is they need their own news station where they can avoid having to try to convince other networks to actually believe in a lot of the their views and misinformation, where they could just pump all this stuff out constantly without having to like try to get actual fair, or I don't know, fair, but actual, moderate, news stations on board with their narratives. So he called for a partisan pro-GOP news operation to be potentially paid for and run out of the White House, aimed at sidelining the censorship of the liberal mainstream media and delivering prepackaged pro-Nixon news to local TV stations. It reads today like a detailed process for the Fox News prototype. And in this, he actually writes, today's television news is watched more often than people read newspapers, than people listen to the radio, than people read or gather any other form of communication. The reason people are lazy. With television, you just sit and watch and listen and thinking it's done for you. So this has been his kind of brainchild since 1970. But after after the fairness doctrine, after all these things come in play, he's finally able to create this news station that's basically just it's a direct megaphone for the Republican Party. So he partners with Mongol media, Mongol whatever, Rupert Murdoch, who's very supportive of right-wing media already, and they create this news station in 1996 that basically just promotes unchallenged conservative narratives to millions of people, 24 hours a day, 365 days. And again, just like Rush Limbaugh, there's this huge audience that they tap into, a huge white audience, and they you could look. We'll talk more about Fox News in a second, but they've just been dominating. They're the number one news station for like 16 years now. And you can see the most racist people they have, the hosts like Tucker Carlson. It does the best, like more racist and more extreme. Their hosts are like Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity. These are the people that are getting the highest viewerships right now. So I want to read this one quote from David Walsh, writes a great article about the rise of all this. But he writes, Fox News presenting an unchallenged right-wing worldview to millions of viewers 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Conservative pundits repackaged Cold War-era attacks equating liberals with communists during the Bush years. In 2003, Ann Coulter, a frequent Fox News talking head, published Treason, Liberty, Treachery from the Cold War to the War on Terrorism, which was a full-throated defense of Joseph McCarthy that accused liberals of being, traitors who hate America. The book sold 500,000 copies in its first 3 weeks. Even the racially charged birther myth that Barack Obama was not a U.S. citizen, was a covert Muslim to boot, was a riff off the old John Birch Society, charged that liberals, including moderate Republicans like Dwight Eisenhower, were secret members in an international communist conspiracy. The cry that Obama was a Marxist, Maoist, Muslim, Kenyan socialist was also interchangeable with right-wing attacks directed against the civil rights in the 1960s. And the idea that a vast left liberal conspiracy was both undermining the country and using dirty, underhanded tactics to do so rhetorically justified an anything goes strategy on the part of the right, shutting down the government, government, refusing confirmation votes, supporting Donald Trump for president. So this talks about a lot, and we're actually going to talk more about this in the GOP platform section. But I mean, there's this long history of for segregationists and later conservatives using, different ways, packaging civil rights activists and liberals as communists, or as evil people trying to destroy this country, trying to overthrow things. John Birch Society, in the 50s and talked a lot, sold a lot of propaganda about how anyone liberal, even Dwight Eisenhower, were secret members of an international communist conspiracy theory. So a lot of these tactics of attacking, anyone, any civil rights activist, any marginalized person, community trying to fight for a better life, liberals, progressives, all this stuff are all just these communists trying to attack, take away or destroy our country, and then white people opposing this were the real victims, and that really again found a huge audience, a huge white conservative audience. So I'm gonna play this. It's called Carlos Maza. He's a Vox News, reporter. He talks about Hack Gap. In many ways, because this is, Fox News is so big, and because it's not a real news station. I mean, there are actual news stations, but the commentaries of Fox News is just a talking piece for the Republican Party. Because of that, it actually affects this balance of all news. So even the point where you're not watching Fox News, you're still being affected by Fox News. So I'm going to play this video real quick.
The truth that, thank God for Fox News or otherwise, no one would be talking about these issues.
In an ideal world, political journalism looks like this. On either side, you've got the parties, fighting for the attention of the press. And in the middle, you've got journalists, sorting through what's important and what's just partisan bullshit. This is called gatekeeping, and it's one of the most important things journalists do. Political operatives can spin whatever talking points they want, but ultimately it's the journalists who decide what's newsworthy enough to pay attention to. But that is in an ideal world, and we don't live in an ideal world, we live in hell. And in hell, there's Fox News. Fox exists in this weird in-between space, because it claims to be a news organization, but it's essentially a Republican front group. The network was founded by GOP political operative Roger Ailes. Not sure why he's posing like Shirley Temple in this picture. Good naughty little Roger. Ailes spent his career advising Republican presidents like Reagan, Bush Sr., and surprise, surprise, Nixon. A memo from the Nixon Library detailed Ailes' dream of launching a Republican news network, a plan for putting the GOP on TV news, which was described as a way to get around the, quote, prejudices of network news selectors. Wow, nightmares really do come true. Ailes eventually founded Fox News, and with it, he turned partisan hackery into an art form. Obama salutes while holding coffee.
Everyone's talking about the disrespectful way the president saluted a Marine yesterday.
Clinton coughs during a campaign event.
We all have our coughing spells, but it doesn't look good when you have all these conspiracy theories about her health.
Right. Rashida Tlaib says a naughty word about Trump.
We're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
Is this what the Democratic Party has become?
Buckle up,
This
folks.
is the new Democratic Party.
This is the Democratic Party in 2019.
Fox knows this fucking bullshit doesn't actually matter, but that's not the point. The point is pretending that it matters, so voters at home think it does too.
They're doing political communications. They're finding a weak point, and then they're hammering it very, very relentlessly. It's a network that was founded by political operatives. It has a partisan operative mentality, and it works.
Now I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, who cares? It's Fox. None of us actually watch that crap. Except you do watch that crap, Mary. You just don't realize it.
Mary.
Because once Fox News goes all in on a story, other networks pay attention.
Political journalists are very sensitive to complaints about liberal bias. And so one thing they do is they overcompensate by paying a lot of attention to what's going on in conservative media. What's in conservative media? What are conservatives talking about? Let's elevate this. Let's take it seriously, even if I don't personally agree with it.
Take Benghazi, for example. I'm still mad about this. In 2012, Fox began peddling wild conspiracy theories about a terror attack in Benghazi.
Explosive new details about a possible White House cover-up on Benghazi.
Unanswered questions about Benghazi.
Questions still remain unanswered. Some have suggested this is bigger than Watergate.
Fox's goal was to smear the Obama administration, sure. But it was also to get other news outlets to take that smear seriously.
You know, at first blush, I think most journalists would be inclined to mostly ignore that. It wasn't nothing, but it just wasn't like the biggest news story in the world, but it's on Fox. It's on Fox. You hear about it more.
Why is the media not dealing with a clear cover up here?
You say to yourself, okay, I don't want to be biased. I need to incorporate this into my news diet, into my reporting.
And eventually, Mary, it worked.
Aren't there still legitimate questions to be answered on Benghazi?
Very serious, unanswered questions.
Legitimate questions.
Too many questions. It's not just for Fox News anymore. It's all of cable news.
So the result of that is that there's incredible agenda-setting power in AM talk radio and Fox News. They all go talk about something, no matter how sort of crazy or unimportant it is. It gets on the news agenda and it gets covered by the mainstream.
Thank God for Fox News for being tenacious enough to cause the mainstream media not to ignore this.
There's no equivalent to this on the left. And that creates what Matt calls a hack gap. Because conservatives can manufacture their own outrage cycles, mainstream outlets pay a lot more attention to their bullshit, which means even minor slip-ups by Democrats can become career-defining scandals. In March, Democrat Ilhan Omar gave a speech about how Muslim organizations had to fight Islamophobia after 9/11.
They recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties.
Pretty non-controversial, right? Wrong again, Mary. Because in April, Republican Dan Crenshaw accused Omar of trivializing 9/11 because she didn't say the word terrorist, I guess. I don't know. Am I bleeding again? And the next morning, Fox News knew what it had to do.
Really? Few people did something? You have to wonder if she's an American first.
Downplaying one of the darkest days in our nation's history.
The Democratic Party has a problem.
Ilhan Omar is embroiled in another controversy today. After making controversial comments, do you feel she should apologize? Do you think she should have rethought her words?
How do you think this controversy is playing out among Democrats?
The Congresswoman needs to be careful about her own words, too.
This is the kind of hacky nonsense that good gatekeeping is supposed to protect us from. And it almost did. Nobody even cared about Omar's speech for weeks after she gave it. But once Fox made it a story, it was over. Look at how many mainstream news segments included clips from Fox.
How do you think this controversy is playing out among Democrats?
The hack gap is a nightmare in a normal year, but it's especially bad during election seasons. In 2016, a lot of journalists realized that the Clinton email server was not the national crisis Fox was making it out to be.
Could this new development put her behind bars?
You've got destruction of evidence. You've got obstruction of justice.
There's 3 specific laws that we found.
There's at least 7 that I've found.
Lock her up!
Yes, lock her up.
Oh, that pleases me.
But because Fox viewers became fixated on Hillary's emails, the story became newsworthy.
I remember talking to somebody who was a high-ranking official at a major newspaper, and I was asking him, why did you guys have so much emails coverage? And he said, well, I think that the email story spoke to some of the electorate's fundamental doubts about Hillary Clinton.
Benghazi, her private email server. It's all part of the same narrative and why many voters don't trust her.
Okay, fair enough. But where did those doubts come from? They came from Fox News. They came from conservative talk radio.
The American public know they can't trust her. Can't trust her.
We can't trust her.
So you put this stuff out, then it becomes a true fact that many people are worried about this email server. And then that becomes a controversy that you cover.
Years later, when it turns out that the Trump White House is also using unsecured communication lines, it doesn't spark the same months-long crisis that Hillary's emails did, because there's no left-wing propaganda machine baiting journalists into overreacting. Not that there's nothing to these stories. Clinton's email server was a mistake. Benghazi was a mess. Omar could have said the word terrorists more, I guess. Oh God, it's in my ear now. Instead, they get blown way out of proportion by a propaganda machine that's trying to score political points, and by mainstream journalists who are too afraid of looking biased against conservatives to call bullshit. And the weird genius of the hack gap is that if you're not watching Fox News, you won't even notice it, because it doesn't look like Fox and Friends or Hannity. It looks like serious journalists covering a serious controversy that they decided is important. But they aren't deciding. They're reacting to a political operation that was created to get you to pay attention.
All right. I think that video just perfectly summarizes the impact that Fox News has, not just on its viewership, but on the personal agenda. And I just think it's funny because that's such a coded word, liberal bias. Anytime anyone criticizes, the right wing, the political right, no matter where it's coming from, they have a liberal bias, and dog whistle, it just it actually makes moderate and liberal organizations even cater even more to the right, because they don't want to fit that description of being liberal bias. And there is liberal bias for sure. There is bias on all sides, but at the same time, that word is just that's such a powerful tool for the political right to avoid any kind of accountability and to help push their stories as in their agendas. So moving on, so we have all this in the 90s, so we have AM conservative radio, Fox News is all these things are forming, but what really launches things into extreme conservatism and extremism is 9/11, is the terrorist attack during September 11th in 2001, and that just kind of blows up conservative media, because it kind of enjoins this, like, because there's a wave of nationalism that occurred after 9/11, and that sparked a lot of white nationalism as well, and the conservative, particularly at first, the conservative radio really jumped on that, and we saw a rise of a lot of extreme talk show hosts like Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck, Dan Savage, Laura Ingraham. They all got their start on AM conservative radio, and we started seeing this point where everyone's just basically out competing themselves to try to be the more extreme. The more extreme they were, the more anti-immigrant, the more anti-liberal, more anti-black, the better ratings they got. Because again, there is an audience, a white audience right now. It's just that's eating this stuff up. And that just creates just such a polar extreme at this point, where conservatives, they just get more and more extreme at this point. And then that world is where we start entering more of the conspiracy theory, organizations, and more of the, more openly racist organizations like Breitbart and InfoWars, Alex Jones, admitted, numerous times in depositions that he's a bit schizophrenic, and that he's making up a lot of these stories, but still they just it blows up to the point that conspiracy theories is, are just a huge thing to this day. So I want to read this, from Brian Rosenwald, wrote, turning politics into blood sport and kicking moderates off the team made for good, passionate radio and meshed with listeners' frustrations. Crucially, because hosts had no responsibility to govern, they didn't have to worry about the policy or electoral consequences of such a stance. And then, this all merges with the first Black president of the United States. And then we just see this explosion, not only of like Obama, but just of false information, of propaganda, of exaggerating, like the fact that he saluted a soldier with coffee in his hand was a huge story. The fact that he wore a white suit was a huge story. And when he talked about how he liked arugula, that was a huge story. And then on top of that, we start seeing, the birther movement. We start seeing these accusations that he's a Muslim, that he's all kinds of just crazy stuff. But that's blown up at the time, and it's finding a huge audience at this time. Particularly, with 9/11, the first Black president, Nixon, just kind of blows up. And at the same time, we start seeing this huge attack on moderate Republicans. They would call them rhinos, Republican in name only. And that's where we saw this Tea Party movement, which we'll talk about. We have a whole section on it was an AstroTurf movement. And we just start seeing more and more extreme, candidates, more, extreme talk show hosts, more extreme Fox News hosts. And we'll read, Brian Rosenwald also says, in 2010, the talk radio business needs further upended the traditional political hierarchy. With moderates virtually extinct, the war against rhinos often focused on Republican leaders like Boehner, whose sin was simply not being willing to adopt the stringent tactics that hosts demanded. Hosts blasted them with increasingly regularity, while praising a new group of political superstars, largely backbenchers with minimum power of Capitol Hill. But they were perfect for talk radio. They spewed extreme rhetoric, saw the world in black and white terms, and advocated for the most extreme tactics possible. Figures like Representative Mark Meadows and Representative Jim Jordan and Senator Ted Cruz became the heroes in the soap opera that talk radio had always been. And rhinos in the Republican leadership were as much as villains as Democrats or mainstream media. Because this was particularly, we're going to talk about this more, but when Obama won in 2008, Republicans, basically the leadership was like, their main goal was just to limit him in one term. I mean, they were going to refuse every legitimate piece of legislation, every policy, every appointment, to try to cause as much chaos. And there was a handful of Republicans that wanted to actually work with Obama to pass some things. And we were in the middle of a recession. And they are just blown away, like people like Boehner, which we could be pretty critical about Boehner as well, but that was, we see this, this group of moderate Republicans just start to get pushed out, and the more extreme, candidates take over, Tea Party candidates, and this really just accumulated, to the election of Trump. I mean, Trump literally just spent, years, or at least he hired people to spend years listening to talk radio and finding the most crazy points, that were out there, but that got the biggest audiences. His immigration stance, ending birthright citizenship, building a wall, Islamophobia, xenophobia, all this stuff. He pulls straight from some of the most popular, talking points in conservative radio, and then launches a whole campaign on that. And that just, again, he finds this huge audience. It's been primed for the last 2 decades with this stuff, and it just falls perfectly in place. Read this last quote by Rosie Gray. If you're one of the millions listening to talk radio, you can almost listen to pro-Trump news all day. It's pure fandom, a conduit for talking about immigration, or it means to give people what they want to say relevant. And you look at just how popular, this slide's a little bit old. I didn't look up, but I'm sure it's the same exact, data. But since 2002, Fox News has been the #1 watched cable news channel every year. They draw enormous audiences. Again, like mainly white, audience, conservative audiences. Like their most extreme hosts, like Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham. These are people that every day go on and just sell these anti-black narratives and these white victimhood, white supremacist narratives, and they get, they are the most watched hosts in this country, news hosts in this country. And even, COVID, during the summer of COVID, this last summer, Fox News actually was the most watched channel of all American television, including sports, including all these other things. They just outcompeted everyone. And at the same time, we're going to talk how dangerous that is, because they've been downplaying and selling, false narratives around COVID to the point that, it's arguably that they have a huge role in the outcomes right now of COVID. Like the fact that we have 4% of the world's population, and we have a quarter of the deaths, and that's we'll talk more about just the role that they have played in that. So I'm going to play you. I edited this clip again down to like 2 minutes, but this is like a 10-minute clip of just nonstop racist rhetoric. But I'm just going to do a little. You don't need to listen to 10 minutes of it. I'm just going to do a quick little 2-minute, thing. And Media Matters is this organization that basically just a watchdog for Fox that just tries to grab all the propaganda and misinformation and the hate rhetoric that's coming out, and trying to actually document it and build opposition towards it.
You can't give me one specific. We're on 24 hours a day, and have been on 24 hours a day since October of 1996. I was there that day. So if you can't tell me one example of coded language or hate speech, that says a lot, doesn't it?
Their bus came under fire.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just another day in Rio.
Hey, black people, stop having 72% of your babies out of wedlock, and your kids won't be massively incarcerated and arrested.
Fist bump, a pound, a terrorist fist jab.
And I put fresh strawberries in here, too.
Oh, what a good idea.
Right?
Make Kool-Aid?
That's another.
I'm going to try this.
Do I do what?
Make Kool-Aid.
No, I don't make Kool-Aid.
This president, I think, has exposed himself as a guy over and over and over again who has a deep-seated hatred for white people.
In a school trying to make students feel guilty for being white.
It's not really a search, it's a quick pat down.
Slaves that worked there were well fed and had decent lodgings.
We keep marrying other species and other ethnic.
People like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton do not deserve to be called civil rights leaders. They are not. They are hustlers and pimps who make a living off inflaming racial tensions.
Black Lives Matter is killing Americans.
The Irish got over it. They don't run around going, Irish Lives Matter.
Why don't you let the Klan host a party? Talking about killing cops, fry them like bacon?
And the KKK did community programs as well.
I didn't hear a word she said. I was looking at the James Brown wig. Same one. Right. The Congresswoman, you saw what happened to Whitney Houston. Step away from the crack pipe.
Maxine Waters of California, a liberal Democrat. She's always angry every time she gets on television. Cynthia McKinney, the former congresswoman from Georgia, was another angry black woman. And who are the black women you see on the local news at night in cities all over the country? They're usually angry about something. They've had a son who's been shot in a drive-by shooting. They are angry at Bush or so. So you don't really have a profile of non-angry black women.
The reason Trayvon Martin died was because he looked a certain way, and that way is how gangstas look.
Again, the most watched news station for the last 16 years. And this is, again, like, Fox News, I mean, there's two sections to it. They have local news that's much more moderate, and then they have, these talk shows basically that just sell this nonstop anti-black, anti-woman, homophobic, rhetoric nonstop. And I want to talk too about, about that guy's comment about, angry black women. That's a trope that we talk about in our stereotypes, where anytime a black, it's used to project its image. It's used to kind of basically shut down any kind of black woman trying to speak up and talk about what's happening. Is, oh, she's just an angry black woman, let's not listen to her. Just like all angry black women. So it push these nonstop stereotypes to the point that their viewers actually, they believe this stuff. And you look at, just like the level of propaganda. So this was done in 2012, and I guarantee it's much worse these days. But there was a study done in 2012 where they basically asked all these people questions about, domestic events and international events, and then they talked about, where you got your news from, and you look at, like the people that got Fox News scored worse on these tests than people that watch no news at all. It's because they're so filled with just misinformation and propaganda at this point. And you can see too, there's definitely other ones that aren't, like MSNBC is definitely, out there, definitely has issues, CNN. They're all around, there's people, all these news stations could do better, and there are, this is not to say this is only a Fox News issue, but Fox News is by far the worst one. And every study I've ever seen, Fox News, pulls the worst when it comes to the most misinformed viewerships. And we're going to talk even more about several more studies as well about this. And I want to play, there's a really great documentary. It's called, How Right-Wing Media Brainwashed My Dad and Destroyed the Family. But it's just, it sounds like very biased, titles. I get that, but it's a really powerful documentary about how, like you look at the viewership, it's an older white viewership, that Fox News, mainly targets that does really well with. And you could see how, I think this documentary does a really great job just showing you how people get indoctrinated into this stuff. And so I'm just going to play it's just a quick little interview about the documentary.
Right-wing media tore my family apart, and my father's story explains how. When I was growing up, my parents were very open-minded. They were like hippies before hippies happened. They always stuck up for people if they were made fun of for being different. My father, who passed away in 2016, was a great example for us in treating people equally. One indelible memory I have was a day trip to a New York museum. It was important to him that we had culture. We lived in New Jersey, so New York was a short bus ride. We were coming out of Port Authority and ran into a black homeless man right outside the terminal. He asked my dad for some spare change. I was scared because I'd never seen a homeless man before. My dad stopped, though, called him sir, and gave him some spare change. That taught me to respect everyone. After high school, I went to Pratt Institute. My father, who worked as an electronics engineer for the government, retired from that and got a part-time job with a long commute. He started listening to talk radio. Talk radio then was Bob Grant, the openly racist and sexist, bombastic radio host. He was called the father of conservative talk radio. He would refer to black people as savages and once called Martin Luther King a slimeball. Very slowly, my dad began to change. He became more irritable and more judgmental of others. About a year later, my dad fully retired, and then he found and fell in love with Rush Limbaugh. Limbaugh had learned a lot of tricks of the trade from Bob Grant. He appealed to the older white guy who perhaps felt shoved aside as times were changing. Soon my dad was having his 3-hour Limbaugh lunches. After he ate, he would sit with a beer and listen to Limbaugh bloviate. Limbaugh must have said what organizations to join because soon my dad started getting lots of right-wing mail and then emails. This caused a lot of problems in the family. My dad became very opinionated and angry. Just say one thing that tripped him and he blew steam out of his nose. He started forwarding us emails which were full of lies and exaggerations about President Clinton, or mostly how horrible Democrats were. I was living in New York, and when he sent emails saying that liberals hated Christmas, I was flabbergasted. I lived in the land of liberals, and everyone I knew loved Christmas. I had a lot of gay friends after college. When my dad first met them, he praised them, saying how cultured they were and how it was nice I was friends with them. When I heard Limbaugh bashing gay people, I asked my father if he agreed with that now, and he got angry and said, "I don't want it in my face." Wow, what happened to Dad? It was like some alien took over his body. We all begged him to stop forwarding us these emails, but he wouldn't stop. First, my brothers blocked him online, then I eventually did. It was a nightmare, and the nightmare got worse when a fellow Limbaugh fan introduced him to Fox News. My parents ended up in separate bedrooms so that my dad could watch and listen to it. My mom ate lunch on her own in the living room. It really was tough. And worst of all, my dad was miserable, angry, and paranoid. For a long while, it destroyed our family. Then my parents moved to a senior community. During the move, my dad's radio broke and he didn't fix it. Later on, he went to the hospital for a kidney stone. And while he was there, my mom unsubscribed him from right-wing emails and subscribed him to sites like Truth Out and Alternate, and he read them all. And then when they got a new TV for the kitchen and my mom programmed the remote, he didn't bother to change the channel to Fox News. One day, he told my mom, "I like Obama. I think he's a good guy." And she was like, "What?" And as time passed, his anger lifted and he became happier. My dad began to love me to visit because I would dote on him. I laughed at his corny jokes that he told over and over. He loved to be waited on, so I would get him tea. I would give him the occasional chocolate, even though he wasn't supposed to have it. Finally, in his very senior years, he was at peace. My parents shared a bedroom again, and I had my dad back.
Right. And I'm not playing this to say that, all Fox News people are like this person, and this is what happens to everyone. I think a lot of people watch Fox News for a lot of different reasons. But I think this does capture a particular demographic, particularly when the director, talks about how this older white male that feels kind of pushed aside, feels like he's losing his way of life, maybe it was laid off, maybe had economic issues, healthcare issues, and it just felt like he was, not, felt like they've been pushed aside, and then all these other groups fighting for their civil rights are something get more attention, and this idea of this like changing country and demographic change and all these things that we're going to talk about. We have a whole section on Trump voters. We're going to talk more about that, and that's not to say, I mean, like there's legitimate feelings behind that, there's legitimate confusion and legitimate fears as well with a lot of these things. Maybe not maybe it's not legitimate to fear that immigrants are taking your jobs, but it's legitimate to fear for your job. And then you have someone say, well, that is just direct your anger at this marginalized group and help us get elected, and we'll help you. But so I just think it's this is an example that, like I said, it's not how everyone gets into Fox News, but I do believe this is a big portion of viewership. And then we start, going into social media. That just, particularly in 2016, we saw this explosion of social media fake news and fake news accounts and Russian, troll factories, pumping out, false news. And it's definitely on both sides, but we see it significantly impacted the right, significantly more. And we'll talk about when Facebook in 2019, just to show you the extent, they did a big scrubbing of all their fake Facebook accounts that was sharing fake news, and they found that within just 3 months they found just as many people fake accounts as real accounts. So we're talking like 2.5 billion fake accounts. It's a huge number of fake accounts that they had to scroll that were just constantly pumping this stuff. And Facebook has this algorithm that's just like it basically studies all the decisions you make, the things you share, the things you like, the comments you say, and then they pick and choose things to match your interests or to match your outrage too as well. And that doesn't decipher from fake news. So if you have a bunch of people sharing fake news about how Obama is a communist, or a terrorist, and the algorithm decides that you're into right-wing politics, all of a sudden you're going to be seeing this fake news much more than other people, and that's what's going to be all over your feed is going to be this fake news. So this Facebook algorithm almost like helps create these bubbles that where a lot of misinformation and conspiracies and things really take off. And there was a 2019 Princeton study on fake news, and they found that so 8.5% of Facebook users shared fake news in 2016 during the presidential election campaign, and this occurred on both sides. But they found a majority of users were seniors and conservatives. So 11% of people over age 65 shared links, compared with 3% of people under 29, and then that 18% of people Republicans shared fake news as opposed to 3.5% Democrats. So it's definitely both sides issue, but it was definitely, again, we need to understand that it's happening way more significantly on the right. So this is, from that study, this is a diagram that just shows conservatives and very conservatives and are just, this is where majority of the fake news is being, shared, as opposed to, you have moderate, liberal, and very liberal, which is still a problem all around. We all need to be aware of this, but we need to also recognize where the bulk of this is happening. So the author said, Andy Gass writes, conservatives may have shared more fake news stories than liberals because most fake news sites offer pro-Trump or anti-Clinton content, and specifically Republicans and conservatives. So the vast majority, including a lot of the Russian sites and the fake sites and stuff, are all very pro-Trump or at least anti-Clinton. And there's another interesting study they found in 2018 that in Germany, they found there was a huge uptick in violence, white nationalist violence against refugees. And in Germany, particularly because the prime minister had committed to accepting an enormous amount of refugees, which caused a lot of white nationalism reactions. And they found that towns with higher Facebook users committed more violence against refugees. And this held true with big cities and small towns, liberals and far right strongholds. And they also found that, per person Facebook use rose to 1 standard deviation from the national average for attacks on refugees. And there was actually, they talked about this one scenario where the power went out in this town. And during that time, there was like, almost no violence at all during that power outage. And then when that power came back on, all of a sudden, the violence picked up again. So there's this direct correlation from Facebook. And Facebook's, we could have a whole nother presentation on Facebook. Facebook is an out of control monster right now. And hopefully someday our government will be able to, regulate them and force, but it doesn't look like it's going to be better anytime soon. And then I found another really story I think is significant in 2019. So Twitter has these algorithms that automatically ban material and content from Islamic terrorists. So they don't have they don't have people that they have people that are checking it, but they're not in real time checking it. They have these algorithms that automatically ban this stuff. And so they looked into actually using this for white nationalist Reddit, because they saw we've seen a huge movement in white nationalism in the last 4 years, and we'll talk more about that in another section. But and they found they actually ultimately decided not to do this algorithm because they were too concerned that if they did this algorithm, it would start banning mainly Republican politicians. So this is legit. Like, they were worried about white nationalists. If they had an algorithm that banned out white nationalist material, that they were afraid that they were going to start banning Republicans, and then they were afraid of the liberal bias, accusations, and that the Republican Party would start, attacking them. So they decided ultimately not to do it, which is kind of crazy. And then even to this day, this happened last month. A story came out that there's a conservative organization, Turning Point Action, that actually has been hiring and sponsoring troll farms, which we think troll farms a lot of times, like in Russia, where there's just tons of people just constantly producing fake news and reactionary comments and memes. Well, they actually hire these teenagers to spread thousands of false messages over the summer. And most of them directed around like anti-COVID, messages. Like, on Twitter, they posted a lot of things like "Don't trust Dr. Fauci," the head of CDC. Distrust in mail-in ballots. Pushing around his claims from voter fraud. So basically, Trump's talking points. But I mean, during the middle of a pandemic, or they're pushing these fake news stories about how the masks are bad, or they don't stop things, and second guessing CDC and local health experts. So I mean, this is definitely something that the Conservative Party, political right, benefits from more than the liberals from the sharing of fake news. So much so that they're actually sponsoring organizations to help spread that fake. All right, so the next slide, I want to talk about the Cambridge Analytica scam that went happen. Again, this is another one of those times where I uploaded a video and into YouTube. I edited a Daily Show video, uploaded my presentation, uploaded a YouTube video, and got dinged on some copyright issues. So again, no big deal. I do encourage this one. I mean, this video is really fantastic. You're going to have to go to the Daily Show YouTube video page to watch this. It's a pretty short video. But I just think Trevor Noah does a really great job, not only like breaking down the Cambridge Analytica scam, which is something that everyone should be aware of, because it's a pretty powerful scam that they pulled, where they just gathered an enormous amount of data from an enormous amount of people, without their knowledge, and then they give that to the Trump campaign, and that they are able to target people. Not only it helped them come up with different phrases like draining the swamp, which they talk about in this video. I mean, like that Trump's administration never even came up with that. They came up with that based on the data they got, and they were. And not only that, there's another great article if you want to read this as well, about they used this and used the data to really target millions of Black Americans and try to convince them through different ads geared towards their personality from the data they got from this data breach to try to convince them not to vote in the 2016 election. So definitely, if you're interested in watching this, just pause this when I'm done talking. You're type in the title into YouTube or Google, or just go, one of these, links and watch it. It's like a 5-minute video, then just come back and go to the next slide. And if you want, definitely. I mean, I think it says a lot already just in the title, but and this is a short article as well, the Business Insider. If you want to read a little bit more, that kind of talks the next step of how they use this data to target people. Definitely check that out. And then at the same time, we have this, we see this, in 2017, this attack on what we call net neutrality. Net neutrality is this idea that all internet, all sites, everything should be equal, and that broad, speeding and all that stuff, as opposed to let's say certain companies or search engines or whatever, deciding that they want to speed up the websites that advocate for their agenda, and then they want to slow down websites that advocate against them, such as things like civil rights movements and things like that. So the idea is, like, let's keep everything neutral. That was a policy of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, for as long as I know, that's always been the policy, is correct, and to ensure fairness in internet services and things. But as we're saying, with FCC, it's a 5-person commission. That the president at the time gets to appoint 3 of the commissioners, and then the other 2 coming from the other party. But that basically says, he needs a simple majority to pass. So that basically says the president gets to decide what the FCC by picking their candidates. And President Trump picked Ajit Pai, who is ex-Verizon chairperson, lawyer, and he's decided to and they spent all-out campaign against the net neutrality. They opened up comment periods, and there was just like millions of comments of like, don't do this, and they actually like tried to hide a lot of these comments. And but unfortunately they went ahead, because I mean they don't really have to. There's no actual policy that says they have to listen to the comments or do what's the American people want. They can do whatever their agenda is. So they went ahead and got rid of net neutrality in 2000. And in 2019, the Democrats tried to restore that by passing a House bill, but the GOP won't vote on it, because they know these kinds of things. There's a reason. It's not just coincidence. There's a reason why Republicans support things like getting rid of the doctrine, the fairness doctrine. There's actually Democrats that try to bring that back numerous times, but Republicans have always disbanded it. Democrats are trying to save net neutrality, and Republicans, because they know are against it, because they know these things give them the huge advantage, especially when they have these huge outlets like Fox News and so this is actually the NRA, the National Rifles Association, actually gave Ajit the Courage Under Fire Award for killing net neutrality, because basically the idea is most of the country didn't want him to, and people sent him all kind try to always campaigns to try to get him to stop. He went ahead and did it anyways. So he's a hero to organizations like NRA. And this is really important, because I want to read this from Save the Internet. It talks about the open internet allows people of color to tell their own stories and organize for racial justice. When activists are able to turn out thousands of people in the streets at a moment's notice, it's because ISPs aren't allowed to block their messages or websites. The open internet allows people of color and other vulnerable communities to bypass traditional media gatekeepers. And then, so there's, and the thing about a lot of this stuff is oftentimes, I mean, if someone wants to act shady and wants to like kind of push out, grassroots civil rights organizing websites, we would never really know that, I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot of trust that goes into our search engines and things like that. And it's just, it's scary not to have net neutrality right now. And then that brings us to COVID. That's not, this past year of just COVID. And there's been numerous studies. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I listed just a handful of them, but I mean, there's so many studies right now that all find the same conclusion. The more people you watch things like outlets like Fox News, the more likely you're going to be misinformed about COVID. The more likely you're going to be anti-mask. The more likely you're going to think that the Chinese government created the virus, or the CDC has exaggerated the pandemic threat, or that, to that the Trump is actually a victim and not the person that's actually perpetuating our lack of responses. And you see this, across the board, and even Republicans who don't listen to Fox News versus the ones that do, like in this graph, you see the ones that do listen to Fox News. They all are, they're all into, believing these conspiracy theories, as opposed to Republicans that don't watch Fox News. So we're seeing the direct results of this, like propaganda network that's literally directly killing us right now, because we can't, as I said, we have 4% of the population of the world and 25% of the deaths right now, right? Between 20 and 25, it fluctuates, but and that's due to the fact, it's directly due to the policies at this point. All right, so the next clip I want to play, it's another really great daily show, but I got dinged again by YouTube for copyrights. So I can't, embed this straight into my presentation, but I can direct you to the, YouTube. So when I'm done, I get to talking again. If you want to hit pause and go to one of these links, you can watch this video again. It's only a couple minutes long, but it's just a really great video. Even though, it's got hilarious, a comedy title, and it's got some funny music and stuff. It really just captures this great montage of how the right-wing media downplay and politicize this pandemic, as we're, just got, I would encourage not to actually skip this video, but this one's worth watching. It's really fantastic. So if you want to go ahead, when I'm done talking, pause it, and then go to one of these links, and then come back, and just go to the next slide. All right. For the sensationalized music, but unfortunately, like, a lot of these comedy shows are some of the best investigative reporters who put everything together like this, and so that's why you see a lot of like Daily Show clips and things like that, because there's no one else that's aggregating this kind of things together for us as resources. But just watching that, that makes perfect sense. Like I said, when you look at where we're at and you look at how many cases we have and how many deaths we have compared to other countries, it makes sense. And even to the point where, we saw, in spring, we saw, as like, as local governments and state governments started, implementing, stay-at-home orders and started closing down their states, to try to better prepare for this virus. We saw huge, not huge, but we saw all kinds of protests all over the country, right-wing protests, Tea Party protests, Trump supporter protests, even politicians. This is actually this scary zombie-like, picture. This is Melissa Atkinson. She's an actual from Ohio, Republican candidate for the state Senate. So this isn't just like, we try to sell as grassroots, but this is not grassroots. This is coordinated efforts. One of the main people that are coordinating this, this is what we call astroturfs. Astroturfs are like the Tea Party, where they pretend like that it's like a grassroots thing. It's just average Americans are angry, and instead there's tons of funders and Fox News and Koch brothers and all these people, creating talking points, organizing them, but have plausible denial, and they claim that this is a grassroots movement. But this is definitely this was an AstroTurf movement. The main organization kind of pushing this was the Convention of States initiative. It was a 2015 initiative launched at actually reducing federal government. It was backed by billionaire Robert Mercer, who's a big political right funder. And they so they created this AstroTurf campaign that basically with the idea is that they were worried that shutting this things down, because like Trump's biggest talking point is the economy. Even though we're going to talk about how like he didn't really do a whole lot for the economy, we're going to talk more about that in the next section, but that's his selling point. And so when you shut things down, for public health purposes, it affects the economy. And so people were worried about it, Trump losing his biggest, selling point, or in reality, his biggest, misnarrative or false narrative. But the problem is, So they created this campaign to get people to kind of push back against, stay-at-home orders. Eric O'Keefe, the board president of the Citizens for Self-Governance, and also the parent organization of the Convention of States, talk about how we're providing a digital platform for people to plan and communicate about what they're doing. But they weren't just providing a platform; they were pushing talking points, they were pushing fears and false narratives, and they got tons of people to come out and protest this stuff. And then other organizations like Freedom Works was founded by Koch brothers to help create the Tea Party. Operation Gridlock, organized by Michonne Maddox, who sits on the Trump campaign's advisory board and is a prominent figure in the Women for Trump coalition. Michigan Freedom Fund, who pays to promote demonstrations on Facebook, so they pay to make these ads all over Facebook. Was headed by Greg McNally, a longtime advisor to the Family and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. You can actually read this article. It's just a long list of pro-Trump, pro-Republican parties that they were basically financing and spreading this misinformation and helping organize these anti-lockdown rallies. So when Minnesota, or when like Michigan closed down, Trump started to get involved and starts tweeting, literally tweets, "Liberate Virginia." And then he says, "Save your great, Second Amendment, gun rights," like as if people were trying to take guns by shutting down. It's insane. But I mean, people jumped on it. And there's this Minnesota Tea Party gun rights organizations all start coming on board, and it's just it blows up from there, and we just see all over the nation these like rallies, and we see how they would come in and just yell and straight in police faces. They would bring assault rifles into government buildings, all kinds of stuff, and the police just allowed it to happen. And then like a month later, George Floyd protests happened, and the police just like violently crack down and just see the juxtaposition of those two during the same month, which is crazy. So that's why you see these difference between the two rallies, and it's just it's crazy. So then there's an organization called Fox and Friends. So I'm just going to play this video because it's too crazy to describe.
This is Fox and Friends, TV's dumbest news show. For 3 hours every morning, Fox's best and brightest sit on this curvy couch and deliver a bizarre mix of internet conspiracy theories,
Sharia law is now changing everything.
general absurdity,
Nickelodeon is pushing a global warming agenda.
and whatever the hell is going on here. It's the Fox show that's so bad, you can't help but laugh at it.
Can we get a stick? Anybody got a stick?
What a bunch of dopes. It's all a lot of fun. Or at least it used to be. Because now, these three geniuses are some of President Trump's most trusted advisors.
Fox and Friends in the morning, they're very honorable people.
That's not coming from me. That's coming from Trump, who recently called Fox and Friends one of the most influential shows in news. And the scary thing is, he's not wrong.
Right now I'm getting a daily intelligence briefing.
From who?
From you guys.
To truly understand the magic of Fox and Friends, you need to watch it every single day. But my therapist says I'm not allowed to do that anymore, so I got someone who is.
Did you know there's 7 days of Fox and Friends? A lot of people think there's only 5 days. No, there's a weekend edition too. It's a lot. It's a lot of Fox and Friends.
This is Matt Kurtz. He's a research fellow at a progressive media watchdog group called Media Matters. Full disclosure, he also used to be my boss. So.
Well, this is awkward.
On the morning of October 10th, 2017, Gertz noticed something weird happening. Trump tweeted this at 8 o'clock in the morning, praising a book by a little-known conservative author seemingly out of nowhere.
So I thought that was weird. One of my colleagues pointed out to me that the author had actually been on Fox and Friends earlier that morning.
His colleague was right. Trump seemed to be responding to a Fox and Friends segment about the book that had aired that morning.
So I looked at all of the tweets from that morning. I had pretty good matches.
Fox and Friends talked about the NFL protests. 3 minutes later, Trump tweeted about the NFL protests. Fox and Friends criticized Democrats over immigration. Trump tweeted about Democrats and immigration.
And I said, well, damn. He's watching the show and tweeting about what he sees.
Gertz started tracking every time a Fox and Friends segment lined up with a Trump tweet, and he found a ton of examples. Fox and Friends goes after Andrew McCabe, so does Trump. Fox and Friends talks about protests in Iran, so does Trump. Fox and Friends talks about Trump's mental fitness, and yeah, the list goes on and on. Sometimes Trump copies language directly from what he sees on screen, quoting Fox and Friends chyrons verbatim. Other times, he tags Fox and Friends in his tweet. I counted over 50 examples of him doing this since his inauguration, because I need a hobby. If you look at the frequency of Trump's tweets in 2017, there's a spike between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock a.m., which is Fox and Friends' time slot. And Fox and Friends has noticed too. They now casually joke about the president watching them live.
When I asked the president to blink the lights on and off if he was watching.
And because they know he's watching, Fox and Friends has evolved from a show that talks about Trump to a show that talks to Trump, actively trying to influence his behavior. A Vox study of 17 months of Fox and Friends transcripts found that after the election, sentences aimed at instructing or advising Trump spiked by more than 50%.
I think the next thing the president should do is start doing some infrastructure.
That same study found that the show was using more language aimed at changing the president's behavior. Phrases like, we need to, we are going, and we have got.
What does the president need to do if he's listening this morning to change the narrative?
Jesus. How is this even real? Okay, power through. You saw this feedback loop in full effect during the debate over the recent FISA bill. In early January, Republicans were widely in support of reauthorizing a sweeping government surveillance measure, and the White House had publicly come out in support of it. But on January 11th, Fox and Friends ran this segment, warning that the bill could be used to spy on Trump officials.
At one point during the segment, Andrew Napolitano turns to the camera and says,
Mr. President, this is not the way to go.
You can probably guess what happens next. Trump sends a tweet criticizing the bill, literally quoting the caption of the Fox and Friends segment. Republicans on the Hill spend several hours panicking.
It is a bit of a confusing morning, to say the least.
And 2 hours later, Trump backtracks, saying he still supports the bill. When asked if Fox and Friends got to Trump, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders decides to make fun of CNN instead.
Sure you're disappointed he's not watching CNN?
Oh! All of this has given Fox and Friends incredible power to hijack the news cycle, to talk about sideshows that would otherwise never escape the Fox News bubble.
What you have is Fox and Friends doing stories, the president tweeting about what he's seeing, and the rest of the media going, the president just tweeted this bizarre thing, now we need to talk about this.
Trump watches a dumb segment about missing FBI texts, tweets about it, and it becomes the top story of the day. Trump watches a dumb segment about the British spying on him, repeats the claim in public, and sparks an international crisis.
That was a statement made by a very talented lawyer on Fox.
That's a lot of power in the hands of a show that's known for getting things wrong. A show that peddles wild internet conspiracy theories.
Secret society, the missing text, it all adds up.
Embraces paranoid fear-mongering.
What, will annihilate North Korea after we're dead?
Yeah,
I mean, we have to do something now.
And launches smear campaigns against Trump's political opponents.
Bob Mueller, we now know, is totally conflicted. Jim Comey is totally conflicted.
It is a carnival of chaos. These are not the people that you want doing the show that the President of the United States is watching every morning.
Unfortunately, we don't have much of a choice. Fox and Friends has spent years being treated like a big joke. But thanks to Trump, these three might be the ones who get the last laugh. While we were shooting this episode, Fox and Friends posted a job opening for a head writer. They're looking for somebody with a passion for current events and accuracy. So it's been fun, Vox, but it's time for me to follow my dreams.
Okay. All right. So all of this, we were talking about, yes, right-wing media is, Fox and conservative, shows are kind of out of control right now. And yes, there is bias and there's false, information and propaganda all over, at the same time. But there are, a lot of decent news organizations. I think that's what gets lost, in this. Is sometimes, it's easy to just be like, everything's biased, everything's wrong, and that's actually a narrative that's used to push false information. Is to try to discredit, legitimate organizations that legitimately have, journalistic, integrity, and yes, there is bias, no one's bias free, but there's also, a lot of decent organizations out there. A really great site is called All Sides. They if you follow them on Facebook or their website, they talk about they're able to kind of they do it all from polling data from readers, polling their opinions on news stations, and then they're able to actually create these charts that actually help people understand, where their news is. Is it extreme left wing, where you may want to be careful, or is it slightly left, or is it in center? And it's a great way to find some just like decent, in the center organizations. And then we actually have, if you go to the People's School of DC in the news, there's a on the front page menu, you can, there's a whole web page, dedicated to news resources and credible outlets. A lot of times, like finding like nonprofit news stations and ones that aren't in the corporate media that are constantly given, the same story over and over again, spread, throughout the country, but finding independent organizations that actually can have the power and capacity to investigate journalism. So definitely check. I mean, if you're kind of lost in this and you want to find organizations that credible news outlets, even on the right, center or left, there's good outlets on all sides, but we have to find them amongst a lot of bad outlets. So definitely check that site out and find some good ones. And if you just want, a suggestion, PBS, for the last 16 consecutive years, PBS is one of the most trusted, news member station, news organizations. PBS NewsHour. It's a great place to, it's pretty center. A lot of people will call it liberal because it's very critical of what's, Trump administration and what's happening. But it's done in a way that a non-sensationalized way, and they, have no problem going after, any side and criticizing any side. So I definitely suggest, if you're just looking for a starting point, start with PBS and then do some research and find the right news outlets. Spend some time exploring them, read about fake news, read about sensationalized news and corporate news and how and all the tactics they use. So definitely check out that resource website. And then I want to end this section with just a quick Ted Koppel quote on he was on the Sean Hannity about why Hannity is bad for America.
We have to give some credit to the American people that they're somewhat intelligent and that they know the difference between an opinion show and a news show.
Yeah.
You're cynical. Look at it. Yeah.
I am cynical because,
You think we're bad for America? You think I'm bad for America?
Yeah.
You do?
In the long haul, I think you and all these opinion shows.
That's sad, Ted.
No, you know why?
That's sad.
Because you're very good at what you do, and because you have attracted a significantly more influential. Well, let me finish the sentence. Let me finish the sentence.
I'm listening.
You do that.
With all due respect.
You have attracted people who are determined that ideology is more important than facts.
And I think I'll just leave you with that last line. I think that perfectly summarizes the right-wing media, and I'll just leave that.